So I've done the layout and all the different measurements and whatnot for all this. So I made my cut list, and I'm going to butt cut these and pocket screw these from the back side. I like to do these mantles like that, and then that's going to give me a full 3/4 inch deep recess in here, which I think they want. I might reduce that a little bit, but I think we're going to go for almost the thickness of the wood. So if we do that, then it'll be good. If not, I'll rabbet the back side. And so I'm going to make the legs, although I would like to use ultralight MDF for the legs and poplar for the front, I'm going to use plywood for the legs because she's allergic to MDF, apparently. This part here is 6 inches, the ripped part, not the edge, not the face frame. 6 inches for this. This part here is actually less. So when you look at this dimension, you're like, oh, this doesn't make sense because that's actually smaller. Well, it's because there's actually a drywall bump out on the wall. So we're actually having to go around this drywall piece. And to illustrate it, I drew a little picture. This is the leg right here, that 6 inch one. And this is the drywall right here. So it bumps out and goes across the whole thing. Okay, now this is the smaller piece. So that's 2 inches, right? So we have a 2 inch and a 6 inch. Now the drywall is about 3 3/4 deep. This part is deep. So I put it at 4 inches. That's going to give me a 1/4 inch scribe on this piece right here. So as I put this up against the wall, this 6 inch is going to touch the wall before this is by approximately a 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to make some pocket holes in these. You probably wouldn't need to go with 3, but might as well. So right. So right now we've got. I just drew these on here so I would remember that these are pockets. So those guys with these little lines right here, those represent pockets. I'm going to do this one first. And I'm going to do this one first so I can make sure that it's even with this. I want those to be exactly the same. Okay, you'll notice that this piece is 7 1/4 inches, and that would put us down here if it was flush, but I need it to be 9 1/4 up. So what I've done, instead of doing 9 1/4 pieces of wood, I did 7 1/4, which are also the top header piece, and I put a mark here, 9 1/4, so on both pieces. So that will give me a space down below. This is going to be helpful because when we put this down, this is going to help me set it, and then it's easier to scribe when you've got just a couple points of contact. So that'll be better. Okay, we've got the sides of these legs. They're going to be attached roughly like that, right? So this is the top of the leg, the front, and this is the side, okay? One of them's going to be bigger, one of them's going to be smaller. Now, the way I'm going to attach them is to use pocket screws. And the pocket screws are really, really good for this application because I can put lots of glue on this surface and then make sure it's square as I screw it down with these pocket screws, and then I don't need to clamp it. So the pocket screws are essentially holding it while the glue sets, and I've got them basically like every 6-7 inches, something like that. There's a couple things to know. This is the top, so this was the good part that was ripped. So there's no tear out or anything, right, on the edge. It's just real clean. So I very carefully laid these things out, and as you flip it over, that clean side touches the bottom of the poplar. And what that does is it creates a nice joint with no tear out, so it's just really clean. And then of course when you glue it, it will seal in everything and make a nice joint. So when I glue this up, I want this to be set back just a little bit. There isn't, it doesn't have to be totally perfect, but as close as you can get to being flush is good, but inset just a little bit. Sanding is done. I've got all this stuff sanded nice. The joints are nice and tight. And just go carefully. I hit it with 100 grit, and that helps really get the mill marks off if there are any bad mill marks. I mean, you need to get rid of those because the paint will show, those mill marks will actually show right through the paint. So you want to remove all the mill marks. And I got these guys all done. So I am ready for the leg assembly. Perfect. So this guy is all done. You can see it's nice and clean. Wiped off the excess. Still kept the glue inside that joint there. So we are good. So these tops, it's really important that they're flush. Right? It's really important that they're absolutely flush, because when we put the countertop on it, we don't want there to be a problem with that. Okay, we're going to start routing this thing, but I need to turn the dust collector on before we start, so I'm going to go do that. these things are definitely ready for some assembly. Well, we'll put some glue on this guy, just around the perimeter, and not too much, but I just want to glue so that the panel doesn't deflect if it's touched, and make sure it's stable. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this guy on. It's like this. Set this guy in, and I'm going to need 2 hands. All right, so I just tacked in 2 right there. 2 nails, and I'm going to do one right here. And I'll do them down here as well. Middle. Okay, so these are just 1-inch brads. And now we will go along this entire edge and just put some. You can see how much overlap we have. It's a pretty decent amount on each side, so I'm not worried about it hitting. It's not supposed to. All right, another thing you'll notice with this is its whole piece face. So the whole piece face, there's no joints in the plywood. That's very important if you paint plywood. Make sure that it's whole piece face. So that's really nice and tight. You can see that. It's nice. Very good. Okay, it's just what I wanted. Whole piece face plywood is more expensive than normal plywood that has the joints, but this is an example. When I get whole piece face, sometimes it's just on one side, but look at that joint right there. If you were to paint that, you're going to see that joint. See that? So that right there, joint, joint, joint. There's all sorts of joints on these guys. Different species of wood, like alder, the joints are even closer, but you notice how there's no joints on this side. So that's the side is the best side. Header is glued up, and you can see I just nailed this on, and it looks really good. So that's awesome. So you can see here, I've got this mocked up here. The leg is with the header upside down. If you go around the front, you can see it's just set, it's just sitting there. Okay. What we want to do is make a strong connection between the header and the leg. And the easiest way to do that is to use pocket screws. We go right below it. So I'm going to go right there, and I'm going to go right here, and then I'm going to go at the bottom, or I should say the top, and I'm going to go right in between. All right, so I've got my Craig drill bit with my little jig here. Okay, now I'm going to drive that screw, and I'm purposely going to put this back a little bit. So when I drive the screw in, it's going to shift the bottom so that it's... Now that that's done, I can pull this away and clean off this. Okay, now those bumps will keep your wood from going tight together. So I just take my finger or a screw and just kind of, scrape it off. And then once I have those scraped off, I can apply glue to the panel, everything that I need glue on, and then I can reapply this and get it all screwed together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring it out so you can kind of see. So you can see I've got that one up there too. So I've got 1, 2, 3. Those 3 have to be cleaned off. But it's got to put glue on first. Have already been made. Nice and tight. Beautiful. That screw are in there nice and tight. And then I've got a screw underneath here. You can see that at the top. That guy right there. Okay, this one here too. So that's nice and tight all the way up. Very good. So it looks good. The bottom's nice and tight. It's very nice. I'm going to cut this to length, 79¼ inches. Man, that is kind of hard to do with one hand. All right, so I just finished drilling these guys, and some of them I could drill on the back side, and some of them I can drill on the front side. So I just did all of them on the front side. All right, so I just sanded this top, so it's good. Now I'm laying out the overhang. So this overhang is just about 3 7/8. Like it's 3 7/8 right there. Now I put some marks here so I can keep track of that. Three 7/8, and then the sides. So that's 3 7/8. Okay, now I have marks here. Mark also there. And then there's actually a line going across the front. I measured also the distance inside from the back. I measured from this post to the back, just making sure that they're all the same. That's going to give me a mantle that's actually flat. Originally it was off just a little bit, so I actually took the 2 clamps, I joined them together, and I just tightened it ever so slightly, and that actually squeezed the middle out a little bit. Okay, this put pressure here, so it pushed in, and that kind of caused that to go out a bit. This is solid wood, so I'm going to glue this part here, and I'm going to glue this middle part. So that's going to be that halfway point, and anything beyond that's going to be floating. So if this wood decides it wants to move, I'm going to go ahead and just let that be, which means that when they caulk it and all that stuff, they'll have caulking on the top molding, and I'll have a nail, but I'm not going to glue that top molding. Okay, so I've got the two end ones and I've got one middle one screwed on, so I'm going to go ahead and show you. Drive this in. Again, these are 1 inch long. That's nice, right? Nice and tight. Out. I think I'm gonna do a profile on this piece of wood that's gonna go under the crown molding. So I'm gonna go ahead and select a profile, what we're doing. I was originally thinking about just doing an OG, but I think I actually might go ahead and do a portion of this. Not the whole thing, just a portion of it. So I've got my featherboard set up, and it's set up to push firmly against the fence there. So you can see, as you push it in, you can see those pieces. They act as little feathers, little push sticks, and each one is pressing up against this wood, and it makes it hard to go backwards. See? So I'm gonna go ahead and run that. And I decided to actually use that bottom bead because I think it's gonna actually go well with the molding, which has got a bead on the top and bottom, so that just occurred to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this, and we'll see what it looks like. A phenomenal cut. That finish is very, very good. Go underneath that, so it's going to be like right there. Okay, that's where it's going. And then there's going to be a crown that's going to go above it. I'm sure you can kind of see that guy right there. So that piece right there, and then there's going to be that crown. Okay, so, and before I apply it, I'm going to sand. This has been jointed, but I'm going to sand it nice and smooth. Got this all sanded up. It's really, really good. And it's very, very smooth. And just enough of a eased edge. Okay, so this is going to be the piece that goes underneath the crown, and as you can see, it wraps around this pilaster and goes over and comes down. It obviously does the same thing over here. Goes across, wraps around, and these pieces are just sitting in here. They're just dry, going across and around. So as we put these together, you'll kind of see that the joints fit really good. With a little pressure, these things come together nicely. So that's the That's the goal. You want these things to be nice and tight. I'm gonna go ahead and sand them first. Okay, I am ready to start assembling this. Now, sometimes the easiest way to assemble these types of pieces, they have used returns, are to do them on the actual cabinet itself. And other times it's better to just assemble them off the cabinet itself and use glue and whatever you want for that. So you can kind of take your pick as to which way you want to assemble these things. Do whatever you feel is going to give you the best result. So I'm actually not going to glue the main part in here. I'm actually going to let that float. And this part here, I am going to glue these miters. So I'm going to put some glue on both of these miters, both sides, and all these pieces. And then what I'm going to do is set them in there, and I'm going to use some spring clamps like these, and I'm going to clamp it up with this. Send them out there. I'm actually going to put a little bit on, start working. So make sure that the edges are flush, like the bottom edge or the top edge. In this particular case, the bottom edge, this part here, because if this isn't flush, it's going to be really hard to sand it. So that's something that you want to really try to get really, really good. Can't see, but these bottom edges are flush, and it looks really good. So to remove these spring clamps, you just use your tool and you squeeze it. Okay, so you've got that right there, and you just squeeze. They're pretty cool. Really, really handy to have. Yeah, that looks really good. And I haven't touched it with sandpaper or anything, so yeah, it's really good. Very nice. So I'm going to cut some crown molding, and I'm going to put this up like that. This is my crown molding jig. The goal is to make this moldings be in the right position. So I just take it and I essentially just slide it. I rock it back and forth until I find a nice spot where it sits flat against the base and the fence. And that's pretty much it. So as long as you're consistent, it really doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's the same for every cut. You can pretty much have it in whatever position you want. Let me see if I can. That's a bow. So I can push up nice and tight, and it holds it. Make sure it's in the right position. But that's just this wood. It's got a pretty decent bow in it, so you gotta work with what you have here. So these are the measurements here. This is how I lay out crown. I just draw a diagram of each piece. That's just the way I like to do it. And the diagram, it's like if you're looking down on the molding. So this is the left piece with that miter right there. It's an outside miter. And then of course this is this piece with two outside miters. So I just go, depending on the job, there's really no right or wrong to this. I usually cut the big ones first so that I know that I get those done with and I have the material. and then I go to the next biggest ones. And then I figure out when I can cut these little ones safely, because those are the ones, if you get caught with those last, you could be really fighting yourself and losing fingers. So you want to cut these little guys sooner rather than later, and then end up with these ones here. So the only time I'll do it a little differently is if it's a stain grade molding and I want to connect all the pieces so that the actual grain matches from piece to piece. That's the only time I'll do it a little different, because I already know that I've got the material, and generally it'll be okay to do that. So I'll start with this guy here, and I'll literally work my way down so that all the pieces of molding, they connect from where they were cut, so the grain matches up real nicely. This is paint grade, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Definitely want to use hearing protection when you're doing this, so I always put my earbuds in, even though they're not actually playing music there. Right now they're not. So we've got these pieces cut, and I believe they're sized correctly. So they're going to go on just like that. Okay, we've got that first one nailed and glued. So we're good to go. I'm going to work on the left side now. And come back to it. I'll try to leave this guy just recording so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And it's good to go. I just need to do a little sanding on it just to kind of flush up that bottom edge before Okay, finally. My God. Not sanded yet, just installed, and moldings look real good. Of course, you always have to blend these, no matter how they look. You still have to blend them, and everything looks real sharp, clean, straight. From what I can see, everything looks real straight. So I think I'm gonna hit this with a sander, with sandpaper, just to take off a little bit of those mill marks. That looks real good, but just ever so slight, just barely a little tiny space right there. I anticipate having tiny little spaces like that because it's just the way it is, but sometimes, you know, there are new spaces like that, but with twisted molding like this, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. So now what I'm going to work on is this band molding that goes right here across the front all the way, and then I'm going to do a couple of base moldings here, and just double check that this joint is all nice and smooth and there's no lips that will show up in the paint. Sometimes after a few days of sitting, these joints, if you sanded them too quickly, they'll actually change a little bit and they could show up. So it's best to just double check them before you go putting moldings on them, and you know, then you're kind of screwed because you can't sand them once there's moldings on them. All right, so we're good here. Everything is very, very nice and smooth, and this whole thing just is really clean. For the band molding, I'm actually going to use this store-bought molding. This is very easy to make, but I happen to have this, and so I don't need to make it, but this is probably the easiest molding that you can make. It's just a bull nose with a little fillet right there, a little bead. It makes that just, you know, stand out. So you can remove the bead if you like and just have the bull nose into a straight, or you can leave the bead on both sides. I'm gonna rip it, so I'm gonna leave the bead on both sides. So it's just like this. Just gonna go ahead and rip this thing. I'm gonna push it through. I have a push stick. I've got my push stick here, and that's going to be great. It'll cover the blade as I push it through. And the blade is not set very high. You can see it's not set very high. Is the profile that I want. Do some measuring. Put a layout line on the actual mantle itself so that I know exactly where I'm going. Right here. And that's exactly the same as this molding here. So that's going to be the same exact measurements. Everything's going to be the same. So my diagram for that molding will be exactly the same. Now, when you cut these little moldings like this, you've got to be careful because these things are going to notoriously want to shoot out of the saw. So just take your time, plunge the saw in, keep it there until the blade stops, and that will really help, especially with these little guys. These ones here will shoot out, and I mean, you don't even know where they're going to go. They're going to go bye-bye. So just take your time. Don't raise the blade until it's stopped. I'm going to get the square out and just put a line so I know exactly where this needs to go. Enter. So it's even spacing on both sides, and that spacing is going to be the same as this spacing here, and it's going to be the same as the width of this. So they're all going to be the same. Okay. So I'm just using my combination square, my little guy, referencing off the top. You can see that's big, and then I can take my square and connect the lines here, there's a line going all the way across. I'll take my square, my bigger square, and connect those dots and then bring it down the side also. Okay, now I'll do that on both sides. Back of this molding here. Maybe it will be easier, I don't know. Drop this down right onto this mark. This molding's pretty straight, but it's not perfect, so you gotta just make sure that you line it up, and right where it is at the top of the line, you want to hit it with a brad. In this case, a pin. And I'm basically wanting to just barely cover up that line. That's the goal, just so it splits that line. Your pressure is from the gun is not enough. It just needs to be pushed with your hand. And every 8 inches or so, it's sufficient. Now we're going to move to the little guys here, and that guy right there, it's good, sure, but I'm just going to use yellow glue, and I'm putting a little on the back as well. This piece is going to sit in here, and it's going to be kind of a suction fit, right, where you kind of rub it a little bit and then have it kind of stick all by itself. Now that that's done, I'm going to take a pin and I'm actually going to put it right on the molding right there. And that molding, see, so that's literally a pin right down the top of it. And then take this guy and connect it just like that. And same thing goes, if you see any glue squeeze out, just take care of it. Don't wait, because you'll probably forget. If you got a little glue squeeze out, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it does take away from the job if you have glue squeeze out. All right. I'm going to use one of these bad pieces here, and I'm actually going to use that to take the glue out since it's a nice flat corner. Compressor just decided to go on. A little bit of glue squeeze out, which is really good. All right, so very nice joint. Very good. All right, so this looks really good. Of course, always need to sand it. All these miters, although they're really good, they need to be sanded ever so slightly. Okay, now we got to work on the base. Okay, I don't know if you could tell, you can see that, but I'm actually gonna be putting a bevel. I decided not to do square. Customer and I discussed this, and we're gonna put a bevel on this top of the base molding. The bevel is going to be inset though into the front, so it's going to be recessed with a little lip, which means I'm actually burying this. So I took off the bearing and washer, so I could get that fillet right there, that lip. So let's see how this works. These aren't that great of bits, so I'm a little concerned, but we'll see what happens. It's poplar, so hopefully it's not too bad. Very good cut. Alright, that's a very good cut. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that just like that. Just ease this edge here, took the sharpness off of it, and also took the sharpness off of that guy. So that's nice. Very good. Okay. I think I'm actually going to really like this detail. All right, I went ahead and stood this guy up, put it on the floor there, the riser, and this way I know it's going to be a fairly decent flat platform, and I've got it bungee corded with this protection here. That'll help and keep it from falling. So this guy is good. I just need a miter around that baseboard. Okay, so you might wonder how I'm going to miter these big pieces, and this is essentially 7.5. I could do it on a miter saw. I'd have to lay it flat, and that miter saw, we all know that those aren't that great, so I'm not going to go ahead and trust that on a 7.5 inch miter. I'm going to use my table saw, and I actually have this fence here. It works great. It's been calibrated on some previous jobs, so I know that it's dead on. This guy here, obviously, you gotta make some test cuts and just make sure you're good. I believe it's really good. So it's my I got an 80 tooth blade in there, and obviously it's beveled at 45. So this part here is what I'm going to do on the table saw, and that's just the bevel. And this produces a perfect cut, right? It doesn't get any better than that. So you've got a perfect cut. Hopefully it's exactly 45 degrees. And then instead of changing the setup and doing a square cut on the table saw, I'm just going to take this to the miter saw and cut this at 90. So that's my dimension I need. I'll cut that at 90 degrees. And so now I've got two tools creating these little pieces here. so now we've got, okay, so you can kind of see what we're doing here. So that piece fits on here just like that, and it wraps around just like that. So you look at the joint, it's really good. Now, I mean, as good as the DeWalt is, miter saw, I mean, it is a good saw for things, but for not, I mean, it's not a saw that's going to get that result. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't, it won't do it from top to bottom. That type of a result, you know, it's just unattainable with the DeWalt big compound miter saw. As soon as you start cutting it, it changes the angle. So on a big piece of molding, it's best to do it like this. Just as before, I'm going to go ahead and use the clamps here for the corners. That will help the glue joint be real tight. So I'm going to put some glue good there. Take this, put some glue there. All right, now just kind of shift it around until you get it to fit real nice. And when it fits real nice, you can secure the clamps . Don't put the clamps too far apart. You want to put them about, you know, kind of a halfway point on the joint so that the miters come together nice and it doesn't shift the pieces too much. I love that method of using the table saw to create those joints. I mean, this is just really good. Okay, so we're all sanded and it looks really good. Probably hard for you to tell, but some of these areas just barely needed a little blending, and now they're really good. It's going to be filling in this space, okay? So that dimension there, mine is about an 1/8 of an inch or so. That should be good. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to mount on the wall, and it's going to secure this piece. So I need to rip that, and then also the top header. That's also going to need in between here and across the whole inside width, and that's going to be the cleat that's going to be securing the mantle to the wall at the top. So this one will be for the legs, and the other one will be for the top. So I need to measure inside dimensions in order to get that. All right, there she is. She's all done. Everything's on her. Looks really good. Next thing is installation. We will be back tomorrow to go put this thing in.